Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Farad with Capitalism Hits Home. This is a podcast about the intersection of all the aspects of our bio, psycho, social, political, and economic lives. It's brought to you by Democracy at Work. Democracy at Work is an organization that is a nonprofit, small donor organization that brings concise, in-depth analysis of issues that are not covered elsewhere. We also want to give you visions of a kinder, better world for us to live in. Please help support our work. Go to www.democracyatwork.info and sign up for our email list, where you'll get all sorts of messages for us and promotions and merchandise possibilities and messages from our podcasters. Today, I want to talk about an extension of what I discussed last time. Last time I talked about the fall of the American empire. This time, even though it's not acknowledged, of course, it's apparent to me, and I hope now to you as well, that the American empire is failing and falling. Today, I want to talk about how we psychologically deal with that reality as well as deal with it in other ways. A good way to discuss this is to deal with a new, very dramatic reality, which is our government financing the war in Ukraine under the banner of NATO. We need to remember that Ukraine is on the border of Russia. They share 1,200 miles of border. We also need to remember that in 1962, Kennedy was informed by our system that the Russians were building a base in Cuba, 90 miles from home, not on our border, but only 90 miles from home. And JFK risked World War III in a showdown with Russia to stop building that base because it was too threatening 90 miles from home. The border of Ukraine shares 1,200 miles with Russia, as if it were Mexico that were building a missile base there, and an air base, and a war base. Our own ambassadors and representatives told us that having NATO recruit Ukraine is a red line for Russia, and they wouldn't tolerate it. Just like Cuba was a red line for the United States, Ukraine, which shares a 1,200-mile border with Russia, was a red line we could not cross without military consequences. The United States helped to engineer the fall of the pro-Russian Ukrainian, I think you pronounce it, Yanukovych, who left in 2013 and was replaced by American-approved personnel. Zelensky was previously a comedian. He was not a leader or a military leader. Starting in 2013, the Azov battalions, which are a strong, state-subsidized fascist army in Ukraine, fascist and avowedly fascist, began incursions into the Russian-speaking pro-Russian provinces of Ukraine in the Donbass region. Thousands were killed from these incursions by Azov. In addition, the U.S. started training Ukrainian troops, i.e. financing them through NATO. They started as soon as the previous leader left, the pro-Russian leader left, and the pro-US leader. The Euromaidan protests started in November 13th. The reason they got rid of, I hope I'm saying it right, Yanukovych, is he refused to sign an association agreement with the EU, the European Union, instead pursuing a Russian loan bailout and closer ties with Russia. Fueled by US money and political influence, he was forced out. And that's when NATO, financed by the US, started training Ukrainian troops to fight. So that the war in Ukraine, which is presented by our media as the unjustified, completely unprovoked war of Russia invading Ukraine, is bizarre. Of course, it was provoked by NATO and the US that were arming a country on Russia's border and bringing them into an alliance against Russia. That certainly is a provocation. We were also training Ukrainian troops. What for? And further arming Ukraine through NATO. What for? But these facts, which are discernible on the internet, are not part of the media. Even NPR says an unprovoked attack. When this attack was provoked, I am no friend of Putin, who's a disgraceful misogynist and in many ways a dictator. However, this was a provoked attack. Now, how are Americans coping? Well, the way they're coping match 5 coping strategies of neurotic people who don't want to face what's going on. Those coping strategies are denial, dissociation, projection, and transference. Denial is where you pretend that things that are obviously true are not true. It's like Santos, who I mentioned in the previous podcast, the congressman who lied on every aspect of his resume, says, well, everyone embellishes the facts a little, the fact that they weren't facts. It's denial. He is denying that he lied blatantly, or for Trump to say he won the election. The votes show that he did not win the election, no matter how many times he contested it. Denial is when you deny what you've done. You just say to yourself, it isn't true. We have those big national examples, but we all know people who deny what they did. I didn't do that. I remember when my son was 1 year old and he crapped in his pants. And I said to him, oh no, you crapped in your pants. And he denied it. He said, no, I didn't. Adam did it. That was a kid in his nursery school. Denial can begin early. You deny what happened. I remember when Juanetta Hoyt, who was the poster child of the sudden infant child syndrome, SIDS, talked about how her children had suddenly died in their cribs. And it didn't come out till later that she murdered them. She suffocated them with a pillow. And of the children that she had allowed to survive, 2 of them reported that she suffocated the babies with a pillow. One of them insisted that she was innocent. He denied what was apparent. Because one of the coping strategies we have to deal with a painful reality is to deny that it exists. And that describes the reality of why Russia invaded Ukraine. Denial is a way that the brain copes with a painful reality. It denies it ever happened. Aldous Huxley said the brain is an adjusting valve on reality. And in that case, the valve turns off. The reality didn't happen. That's denial. Another way of coping with painful reality, another neurotic and self-defeating way of coping, is dissociation. Dissociation is where you just go another place in your mind. You don't allow a reality to come in. Children all know how to dissociate. That's the only way they can escape the painful realities in their homes, is just zone out. That's a common word for dissociation. Be somewhere else in their mind while their parent is hitting them or screaming. We all have that capacity. And Americans dissociate from what's going on. We pretend that it isn't going on at all. We deny what's going on, and then we go somewhere else in our mind. We go to the great, heroic Ukrainians fighting the oppressive Russians and invading for no reason at all. That's dissociation. Another is projection, another neurotic coping strategy. When you don't admit your own flaws, but you project them on someone else. So when Trump says the Mexicans are rapist thieves, he's the one who has all those 27 sexual assault accusations against him. Not everyone of Mexican origin. He's the one who steals money by not paying his taxes. But people project onto other people their own flaws. There's an interesting thesis, which was written by a graduate student at City College, which shows that the same things attributed to the Irish in the 1800s, when they arrived here, are attributed to African Americans now. Shiftless, lazy, thieving, all of those epithets of distrust, which really have much more to do with not wanting to admit that other people have the same qualities as you. You don't have them. They do. That's very common. A good example of projection is the United States that invaded Vietnam, not on our border, but across the world, invaded Iraq, not on our border, but across the world, invaded Afghanistan, is outraged that the Russians invaded Ukraine. Who are the world's biggest invaders? Who? The United States. The same time we hear reports of the Russians have bombed civilians. We all watched the carpet bombings of Iraq and things blowing up. Who gets killed when homes are blown up? Not the army, the women and kids who are there. When the drone goes over and bombs a wedding, as was reported many times, it's civilians who are killed. And we are outraged that in a war, civilians are killed. Even though the last 3 wars we support, civilians were killed en masse. 6 million people died in Iraq. Most were children because we bombed the water supplies, and so they were contaminated, and the kids died. Those were civilians. They weren't child soldiers. Oh, that's an example of projection of your own guilt onto someone else. We are guilty. We are the invaders of other countries, the primary invaders, whether in Korea or Vietnam or Afghanistan or Iraq. We have blood on our hands there. So to act outraged that someone could invade someone is, just not It's not appropriate. There's a folk saying that's appropriate here that's really about projection. And it's, "You've got a hole in your head," said the sieve to the needle. Hello? Another one is transference, where you transfer your own feelings and neuroses onto other people so that they are the evil ones. They have these bad qualities. It's similar to projection. Now, how have these applied? Well, I talked about denial. We have denied that the primary invaders in the world are the U.S., whether it's in Korea or Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan. No one else has invaded 4 countries since World War II. Or whether it's, and we deny that, and act outrage. How could another country invade? That's that sieve to the needle message. Another is dissociation. You just go somewhere in your mind. So you don't really acknowledge that reality. And you project your own behavior onto other people. Transfer from yourself and your own guilt onto somebody else who you find guilty. That same mechanism has been responsible for the othering of all sorts of people. The othering of Jews, the othering of the Irish, other immigrant groups, the othering of African Americans, the othering of Hispanics, the othering of the Chinese, which led to the Chinese Exclusion Act in the United States, that they were responsible. Even in the name of the Spanish flu, which killed so many people, it started in Kansas. But we had to project it onto someone else. And so that these 5 very neurotic mechanisms characterize what has happened in Ukraine, where NATO, led by and largely financed by the United States, has provoked Russia into invading Ukraine because they share 1,200 miles of border, and then acted like Russia is an irrational monster invader for no reason, an unprovoked invasion. That's the word that I've heard over and over again on the media, where it's ostensibly the liberal media, like public radio, or the more conservative media. That's denial. That's dissociation from your own responsibility onto other people. Now, of course, 2 people can do a criminal thing. Just because the United States invades doesn't mean no other country is justified in invading. But in this case, I'm not saying the Russians were justified, but they really had very little choice. It wasn't 90 miles from home, it was home. And in terms of projection, we're projecting our own history of invading other countries onto Russia, countries that have nothing to do with our borders. And we are arming Ukraine to fight our proxy war for us, because Biden knows full well he won't get Americans to die for that. It also should be said that they constantly say, and this is denial, dissociation, and projection, they say that Zelensky is the champion of democracy against the dictator, Putin. Well, as soon as Zelensky got in, he canceled all opposing political parties. He canceled all programs that were critical. He wiped out the opposition. That is not the action of someone who's saving democracy, but someone who's presiding over a dictatorship. They also arrested every young man of draftable age that did not fight was arrested, given the choice of going to prison or fighting on the side of NATO against Russia. That's not democracy. People should be able to disagree, should be able to be dissenters, not arrested and forced. And yet, Ukraine, under its dictatorship by Zelensky, picked by the United States, is championed as a great leader of democracy and given over $100 billion. The total amount, let me see in my notes, was quite amazing since the beginning. I think it was more like $3 billion. But at any rate, it's amazing. Oh, it was $17.5 billion since the beginning of this administration in 2022, because it's not counting that we're paying for the training of their troops or of the other aid given. $17.5 billion. Americans are dissociating from that fact and what it could do for America in terms of public health care, which other European nations almost all have, in terms of good public child care, daycare, baby care, after-school care, in terms of paid leaves for parents, maternity and paternity leaves, clothing allowances, which they give in France and Scandinavia for families who are struggling, paid vacation time. I was recently in France and talked to a cab driver whose wife works at a bank. And she's been working there for 10 years, and she gets 7 weeks paid vacation. And she can choose the time, which is amazing. He said it's wonderful because they have 2 kids. He owns his own taxi, so he works a lot. But she can take off for their children's events. France is just as diverse a country as the United States. But they have given up their military aspects. They've given up their empire. Algeria was the last of their empire, and they had to give it up. It's time. It's time we give up our attempt at empire. It's time we give up the budget of $850 billion, which we gave to the military this year, and cut it 10 times down so we could be safe, give it for public health care so we don't have the highest death rate in the world, and for our lives so Americans aren't so angry and alone and unhealthy. Give it so that we could convert with that money all the things that we need to survive, from profit, commodities that make people sick and uncomfortable and unhoused, whether they're food or shelter or heat or cooling in the summer, or neighborhoods where they have clean air and clean water. We could use that money, but Americans have dissociated from that reality and allowed this to happen, and we can't allow it anymore. There's real hope for us and the whole world and the planet to survive if we stop this. By the way, war and missiles are not good for the environment, in case nobody remembers that. We have it within our power as America to stop denying our fall and trying to reclaim it through war and other dubious means, and instead use our vast wealth to make our nation and the world a better place to live. That's all for today. I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank people who support us. I want to thank people who share this program. And I want to urge you all to go to www.gateway, democracyatwork.info. Be on our mailing list. Get our special messages. Get all of the benefits that you can get from joining Democracy at Work, including the benefit of analyses that are important to have and that are not part, sadly enough, of our daily media deluge. Thank you very much. Goodbye.